Hey Jeff, how are you doing?
Doing change.
I trust all is well. You're on the East Coast, right? So it's pretty late.
It's 7 o'clock. It's actually
Okay.
perfect. It's not 1 a.m. It's not 2 a.m. It's had dinner. I'm all ready.
I've been discussing with some of the work group leads who are running calls that are midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. in Japan, and I've been like, can you guys do some of these solo? I thought it would be like one a month, but it's turned out to be 1 to 2 per week, and you just get to the stage where you're a zombie.
You need a Shane GPT who just does all the Shane stuff on the call. So
That's a good idea. I have no fear of our robot overlords. I'm ready. So Victor's on the line too. Welcome on board, Victor. And what I'll
good.
do is I'll just, hi, welcome, Victor. Sorry, apologies. I'll dive straight in here and I'll just show our antitrust policy notice. So we show this at the beginning of every meeting. The full antitrust policy is on the Linux Foundation website, and you can ask counsel or ask questions of our counsel, Andy Updegrove, if you have any, and you're an LF member. The agenda today is pretty simple. We'll be working on the supplier education leaflet. I've just put the link to that in the chat if people want to access that and have a look. Now, this is something we've been working on for a little while, and hopefully today we will have covered most of the important parts of it. We'll be able to proceed to formatting it and getting it ready for the future. Oh, I had a problem with the link, so I'm going to resend the link in case the link I posted was not working for me. So here's another variant of it that definitely did work for me. If you have any issues, let me know. Okay, so I'm just going to correct on the slides here, the link, and make sure it's okay. So in the last meeting, as I said, we were working on the supplier education leaflet, and that's this document. The purpose of this document was to go through the basics to help supplier companies understand open source and understand open source compliance. This document was created by the OpenChain Japan work group in Japanese, translated into English. The availability of this document has been almost 5 years, incredibly. And it's time to revisit it for two reasons. One is to include our security specification. Another is to take any lessons learned, tighten up the language, and so on and so forth. Now, this editing process on this leaflet is happening in conjunction with something else we've been doing, which is uh, updating our basic training slides, which were the very first reference material we made for the OpenChain project in 2016. Taken together, the supplier education leaflet and our training slides are somewhat of the foundation. If people say, what is this open source? How do I train my people? You email the leaflet, you email the slides. Nathan has just about finished the slides. They'll be the topic of our next call. And the leaflet, obviously, is what we're doing today. Now, we did a lot of work on this already. On our last meeting, we closed off 5 GitHub issues from Steve, um, adding things like the White House executive order reference to NTIA, improving and tightening up the language, and so on and so forth. You can see all of these GitHub issues on GitHub. I'm pasting them into the chat. I have to paste them in a couple of pieces. It said it's too long to paste all of them. So just doing that now. 5 issues in total. Now those 5 issues are integrated in the document I linked earlier, which is the version 2 draft. And this meeting, we're going to be looking at a docx. This is from Martin Yagi, who is a contributor to the education work group and has provided ideas and feedback extensively through our reference material. Now, the format of the Word document, of course, is going to change how we do this. So I'm going to share the Word document, and I'm also going to put the link to it in our chat. The version of the Word document I'm using is on the cloud, so everyone should be able to access it and work on it. This is getting a little bit old school, like our old spec editing days. Now, the process I'd like to have this time is to run through Martin's document and either integrate or not integrate his suggestions, and then offline I'll merge with the GitHub document after opening a pull request for that. There might be some overlap between the suggestions Martin has and what we already have altered in the supplier leaflet, but I'm not too worried about dealing with that at merge time. It's not a very large document. So the first thing is, I think, a good question from Martin. He's asking, is this leaflet intended for all of the chain, including the end of the supply chain, or the suppliers? And the answer is, it's intended for the suppliers, uh, and the idea would be the end companies or companies further down the supply chain send it to their suppliers requesting that the supplier does X, Y, or Z. So for that reason, I guess the fundamental question is, do we change do we change the name from supply chain education leaflet to supplier education leaflet? I think supplier education leaflet sounds good. What do you think?
So, hey Shane. So, this is a leaflet. This is a little bit of like publicity, and maybe you haven't heard of us. Can you have a couple minutes to hear about OpenChain? We're in the airport getting people as they go by. We're going to the supplier. So, I think using language like software supply chain or supply chain, um, people are going to hear that over and over and over again. And so, to use the language that they might be hearing exactly. Open software supply chain or supply chain, I think is a great way to catch them early on. Especially if that's going to be the top headline of what the what the document is saying. So I would try to reuse language that they're probably hearing already in the news.
That's a really good point. In that case, I mean, if we go back to that, have a look at it. Let's say we stick with supply chain education leaflet. We start there. Supply chain, we know they know. Um, do you do you think we should reference open source, for instance, open source supply chain management guide or similar?
Maybe let's role play, if you don't mind, like role play for a moment, which is
Sure.
when might we see this pamphlet? Is this um, I'm at a company. I've just seen this. I went to a conference. I just learned about the OpenChain project. I've read about the ISO, and I want to kind of be an evangelist for the group. Or I'm in the chain and I'm passing it on I'm a supplier and I'm passing it on to I'm a an organization and I want my suppliers to follow these practices. I think that's kind of the role, the personas that are going to be involved here. I want people
Yes,
about open chain. I want to introduce open chain and the idea of the software supply chain to people. Is that correct?
that's correct.
So I I I guess I'm always a little more going for the human touch, or a little more and I don't think we should. I don't have to wordsmith this now, but like if I see supply chain education leaflet, it seems very um, I don't know, like brutalism. Like it's just
Yep.
I look at this and I'm like, it's like some medical device, like some medical, like, oh, you should get your this checked this year. It's maybe something a little along the lines of um, I don't get it. And I don't want to wordsmith this right now, but like supply chain education leaflet doesn't scream out. It tells me what kind of what it's doing. Okay, I'm going to learn.
Right.
But I wonder if there's something.
Got it. Something that feels more like this is about to help you.
Yeah,
Uh,
it is
yeah,
because specific is terrific. I'm going to teach you about the software supply chain education or supply chain education. I personally would put software supply chain in there, even though yes, there's the hardware bomb and all that, but we're not talking about screws and bolts. We're talking about primarily your software and the challenges for managing software. Um, so
well, maybe in that case.
whether it's the title or somewhere between the title and then the introduction there, really, really to talk about, this is to help address the challenges of, um, managing the massive amounts of open source. Before we get into specifics about ISO this and Japan workgroup
Right.
that, I got 10 seconds to catch somebody's eye before I make them go to sleep, and I think that's what the top of this leaflet is super important in order to get that. But I'll stop there because I know we have a lot of other things to chip through there. But this is
No,
my
I think
spot.
it's a really good input. Maybe something as simple as managing your open source software supply chain or similar might
Yep,
be a good starting point.
yep.
That's a really good point. I love your phrase that is kind of brutalist, which is a great way of capturing it. It's like here is data, which is workable, but maybe we can make it feel like okay, I'm getting a new friend here.
And not to put aspirations on the current language, just like that. That's just my gut. Like we have so much data to dig through. So
Absolutely. And for context, I think that this leaflet as it stands, this text comes from a document designed for printing, right? And the opening side of it was the title, and then the sections go on, and each section is broken out into printed sections of the document, which of course changes how you read it, how it feels to you as a printable document. But in this case, we're having multi-purpose markdown, which can be repurposed in any direction, which also means that, to Jeff's point, adjusting the tone and so on can be quite important. Yeah. All right. Um, let's move on to Martin's next point, which I think is good. The leaflet currently has some of the history of it in the introduction, and Martin's point was maybe we should just jump straight to the meat and have things like the history at the end of the document. I think he might be right. If we stick to the primary message, we can move the credits as such elsewhere in the document. What do you think?
I agree with Martin and you. I think it's great history, and there should be thanks in the back. But I think the um, you know how it was created is important, but it's not what we're trying to catch people's eyes with right away in our first paragraph.
Yeah, and I guess we have a thing that people only have so much space in their head per day. They're going to get this as an attachment, open it, and we probably want them to focus on the primary mission um, while they have the capacity and move them on to secondary points later.
I saw a great thing talking about old newspapers this week, and I'll spend 5 seconds on this, which was the old headlines used to say like a cat, something to catch your eye, the important headline, and then like one important thing to take away, and then the rest of the meat. And I kind of like that idea when it's like around pamphlets is you know get like almost like the three headlines early on because people might not take any more away from that, and then
Right.
how specific. So and I think that's what we have in our headline, and then the introduction and those first two or three sentences of the introduction are really that if I don't read any farther than this, have I gotten some good education? The OpenChain project exists. Here's what it does, and then here's some keywords so you can go find out more at some later point if you don't read the rest.
That's a good point. I like that. This is wordsmithing. Martin's saying that he'd like us to make the market coverage items shorter or punchier. I think that's a good point. I mean, maybe we don't need to list out items at all anymore. We used to have to explain to people the scope of this stuff. But maybe we can just say, this has been incorporated into almost every electronic product and stop there. What do you think?
I think the one I agree. I think the one thing is it is sometimes nice to explain that it is like everything from consumer devices to industrial devices to automobiles to the like again, not to list out everything, but to really, not this thing say, oh, this is only about things in my program files directory, or oh, this is only talking about physical products that I plug in, but it's not, servers or this or that. So
Right.
it's important to have that. I don't, but not to, such detail perhaps. But I think it's important to have that, like, make sure people understand that it's not just consumer, it's industrial and consumer and this and software. It's software and devices, consumer and industrial.
All right. So in that case, yeah. So maybe we could actually just run with what you said. You know,
So something like from
yeah.
consumer to industrial, consumer and industrial devices. Um,
Yeah. Consumer to industrial devices. Maybe then intangibles and choosing something like from cloud to embedded.
like that. Yeah. No, maybe we just added four things to the list, but yeah, I agree.
Well, we can then pretend we're doing well by deleting that. And there we go. From consumer to industrial devices, from cloud to embedded software. I think that might accomplish it, more or less.
We'll be back next week. We'll see.
Yeah. On the next episode of Education Work Group, we undo the previous work. Yep. Uh, okay, Martin made an interesting point here, saying open source, in the leaflet said open source is an indispensable part of helping companies to bring high quality products or services to market. And Martin said it's equally applicable to low quality and slow services. Um, yeah, I feel like we should stay on the positive thing
Yep.
because if we, yeah,
Question for you. Maybe this is a Linux Foundation question, which is: do you find that we should be defining? Is there a one or two sentence definition of open source? We're going to talk open, open, open this whole document, but do
right,
we do a little bit of open source is the blah 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 XYZ of worldwide development or whatever that we put in early on in this document to to capture people who are googling open source and blah blah blah, but also to maybe give a little executive summary for people who might not know.
right. There's no unified single response from the overarching 1,200 projects in Linux Foundation, but we can refer to the OpenChain ISO standard, which says that open source is essentially, it says defined by the open source definition, the free software definition, or similar.
I'll add that as a comment. We'll keep going on the
Yeah,
existing things, but I'll add that as a comment.
that sounds great. Right. Um, there's a section here which Martin says he thinks doesn't belong, which is saying, that open source is a vehicle for advanced innovation and it's good for engineers to prove skills and experience. And he's saying that's true, but I don't see why we're telling suppliers that. And I guess that's a valid point, staying really focused on message to prevent people going down other rabbit holes. If this is for suppliers to get up to speed, maybe we don't need to diversify in value proposition. What do you think?
I agree. I think we could remove it.
Yeah, it's not something where we'll be undermining open source by not describing all of its benefits, but rather, I love your tale, Jeff, about the newspapers where you're giving a headline, subheadline, key points. Okay. Okay. So Martin had a point in the next paragraph, which is that the paragraph talks about open source can be used, distributed, modified by anyone. And this might be what we take later and rework into referring to an open source definition.
Yep.
So we might move this upwards. I'll just make a note that we probably want to move this to the start. Here's my comments. Okay. But then the second part of the paragraph is talking about distributor requirements and terms, cases where suppliers were sued and lost because they didn't satisfy their obligations. And
Hmm.
it ends saying there's best practices to help prevent it occurring. And Martin says, that's true, but why just leave it there hanging? And maybe he's right. Maybe what we need to do is to say explicitly this leaflet, uh, or this document is intended to guide you towards best practices to prevent this happening. And that means it becomes more a case of very, very directly referring to the fact that what you hold in your hands is part of the solution. I think that works.
And the OpenChain project in general, and LF and education, et cetera, et cetera. So it's the key.
Yes, absolutely. Mm. By the way, is going to get wordsmithing. Maybe further. Okay. This is designed to be a placeholder and clunky, and I'll get back to the rest of it later. Okay, so the next point from Martin, oops, Daisy, is just a language point that we say by the same token, security issues occur around open source. And he's saying, why same token? What is this referring to? And I think he's right, just saying similar to all other software. Security issues occur with open source, it's just tighter. Um, so I'll just say makes sense. There's really no argument with getting rid of a couple of words, replacing with one word, and making it easier.
I would agree.
Thanks, Jeff. And I think I think by and large, I'm with so George Orwell,
Hmm.
or Blair, his real name. If you can say something simply, do so. So if we can ever chop out a word, and most of our audience is non-native speaker, so every time we try to sound smart, we've just alienated someone, and that's stupid. So one of the challenges, I think, though, and this is something we hit again and again and again and again, is that the norms in different dialects of English and different regions of English can be quite different.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, for example, something that sounds very simple to me coming from Irish English can really throw someone from Singapore with Singapore English.
Hmm.
And a lot of what we do, I think, is fundamentally looking at stuff and thinking, why don't we replace this with one word and then a counterpoint? That one word replacement is going to throw off a whole lot of people. So, not always shorter, but always consider, can we be shorter? Can we be simpler? Can we be clearer? And in this case, by the same token, replaced with similar. Yeah, that's going to work everywhere. Here's an interesting point from Martin. The next sentence is, by understanding open source, it is possible to prevent and address many of the issues that before they become a concern. And he points out, I'm not sure that understanding open source per se leads to this. And I think he's right. By understanding open source, it is possible to prevent and address issues before they can become a concern is true, but it's not precisely the point. So, yeah, this is somehow referring to the obligations and rights of open source. It's possible to address and prevent issues. So maybe we should say that explicitly.
And this is talking about the security side too. So it's
Yeah.
or maybe it's not. It's in the is some blah, blah, blah. By understanding open source, these issues I think is talking, I guess, both legal and security. Um,
Yeah.
maybe it's like by understanding how open source is um, built, selected, and used. Built, select,
Yeah.
some kind of active verbs around. Not just understanding open source. You're understanding how open source is used, and you know, not just used, but selected and maintained, etc.
Maybe just like that. Ooh, there's formatting inside comments in Word now. Okay.
That once it happens,
Yeah.
maybe undo.
Uh, yeah, no problem. I'll dig this out and I'll use my magic trick to wash the content and put it back in just 1 second. Okay, here. Maybe like this. By understanding how open source is created, used, and maintained, it is possible to prevent and address many of these issues before they become a concern. I think that kind of covers it. Let's see if we get that text white. Nope, it refuses. Okay, I'll just put that in there. Uh, yeah, that seems to be more accurate. Okay,
I think as well, where it says that this leaflet is licensed under CC0, maybe
that should be something else, right?
that could probably be slammed right to the bottom. Like keep it, but it's kind of a distraction. Like I don't even know what the heck CC0 is when I've been handed this pamphlet. Um, I would slam it to the bottom.
Right. Okay. So I like the credit. This is made by the Japan Work Group. It's leaflet under CC0. All of that stuff goes somewhere else. Yeah,
Love it.
I like that. We have a comment here. The pamphlet explains like point one, 2, point 3. Then there's a commentary, a notation about risks. Unfortunately, there have been cases where a company's failure to comply with their responsibilities resulted in litigation. And Martin says, I don't think this should be stuck between points here. It should be somewhere else. I think he's right. Pamphlet explains what is open source, what do you need to get the benefits, what are the risks, what are the supply chain issues, and what do you do to ensure that everyone gets the benefits. And maybe
Part of
this
three. I
yeah,
think meat of three.
yeah. So maybe we can move this down after the list, because after the list, it starts to get descriptive, saying that different points are intertwined. Here's stuff, blah, blah, blah. Maybe this can be somehow just put down here after 5, after the list, as we begin the editorial about this. So we see a list of things we're going to do, and then we set context that from our perspective, the challenges, there's been cases where open source isn't understood, licenses aren't followed, blah, blah, blah. Do you think? Okay. Let's see what else we got here. Sales personnel. This is saying who needs to understand this, and it's saying sales personnel should understand that customers need open source related information.
And this might be a place where we add, like, I don't know if SBOM is mentioned anywhere in here, but I think this year, next year is the year of SBOMs, and
Right.
salespeople might be that lead. Whether it's the sales, salespeople are going to hear about it somewhere in here. Perhaps we should have the. Um, I'll ask
NTIA.
whether it's
Yeah.
the salespeople are very often the first people to hear that SBOMs are required, because to close the deal. But I think it's good to have that as a key, and also figure out who the right person, whether it's salespeople or somebody else that should be mentioned with, and perhaps its own.
Right. That's a really good point. I mean, maybe says maybe we should mention non-advertisement conditions and documentation here. So he's coming at it same point, different direction.
And that might be
That maybe we need. Sorry, go ahead.
the market, like marketing people might need to understand the non-advertisement and promotion conditions. Maybe we just
Right.
Martin correctly added another bullet point of somebody who's in, who might be interested in this. Is
A really good point. And I mean, you're obviously right. SBOM time. Maybe we need to sprinkle a little bit more of that throughout this leaflet to make sure that it's in context, that people don't think this is separate from the requirements I'm seeing with SBOM. It's like, no, it's not. No, it's not.
maybe
This is all.
or two. There's going to be a lot of SBOM noise, and you don't have SBOMs without OpenChain.
Correct. All right. Um, so Martin is saying that examples of open source, there's a big description of Linux, and he's saying he understands why that's there, but he thinks it's unnecessary text. I
You know,
think he's right and not right at the same time, in that we we probably can make the Linux thing a lot shorter. The in addition to Linux, and then it lists a handful of things: Apache and GNU compiler, Eclipse. I would actually mention, you know, Kubernetes and a
mm,
few large language models or something here, rather than Apache. In fact, I think Apache is no longer number one. I think it's
X.
yeah. Okay.
I agree. I do think it's good to have a little, like, a little story time, because then it's less dry, and I'm new to, like, if I'm somewhat new to, I'm the lawyer. Say this has been handed to me, and the IT person or the lawyer. I think
Right.
it's nice to have a little story time that I can then pass on to someone else, and I've been left with a one, two, three sentences that I can kind of regurgitate to other people. Like, why is
Right.
this, like? Because if I'm saying, oh, we got to manage our open source, and somebody says, what open source are we using? And I don't even know a single example, a little dumb. So it's kind of nice to give somebody, one, two, three examples of open source projects that they can rattle off. It's like, oh, of course we need to use this because we use Linux, we use uh, uh, MySQL, we use Postgres, we use Kubernetes.
Yep.
And maybe this is where we look and we say, obviously Linux is going to get the automotive and IoT world. Um, we need to maybe look at the SaaS world, and it's almost like there's four open source projects that we should mention: one for automotive, one for SaaS, one for you know back end servers, and one for front end. You know, for the web people. You kind of
Right.
get the four keys. That, of course, oh yeah, yeah. Well, God, we use Node, we use Postgres, we use Linux, we use whatever.
A really good point. And I mean, in this sense, I think we probably need to really rework this part, uh, so that we cover, as you said, embedded SaaS backend and front end. Yeah,
Yeah, because
I like that. So we this thing will be compressed into maybe one paragraph. That's a tail, as Linux, an example. And then this gives other tools. People are like, yeah, but we don't use Linux. And then you're like, yes, but all your cloud stuff, whatever. And of course you do use Linux, but okay.
and this may be a point where we say, and you are probably using hundreds, thousands, or hundreds of thousands of these libraries in your organization. And we may mention in the doc, but gotta really hit them over the head with the magnitude of the use of open source.
That's a really good point. So we're gonna hit scale here. Yeah, I love that. Okay. Uh let's see what else he's got. Sorry for the coughing. Got a bit of a cold.
Glad we're remote.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm a Japan resident for 15 years. I'd have turned up masked and distant from you. You'd be like, wow. Uh, yeah. Okay, so all right. This is an interesting point. It seems pedantic, but I think he's right. This is saying with some open source licenses, copyright holder grants others the right to use or distribute the software. And I guess what I get what was being communicated here. Um, but it should be, I think, as Martin said, all licenses appear to give these grants.
Like commercial might not. Like all open source by its definition gives you the rights to use and distribute and maybe modify.
Right.
Commercial will give you the right to use, but maybe not distribute. So
So maybe we just say we go direct. Open source licenses uh, are a grant. Maybe just say something like that. Open source are a grant by the copyright holder, giving other people the right to use or distribute software, or similar.
yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Somebody might say, is it really like this? Might be where we get into the legal wrangling. Is it a grant? Is it a license? Is it a blah blah blah? I don't know enough about the uh, worldwide use of the word grant, but
Right. Um, over breakfast, because I'm genuinely weird, I was just looking at the French case, which just concluded with a damages of almost 500,000 euro, 300,000 for the case itself, 150 for the moral damages. And this case was winding through court since 2010 in France. It was against Orange, a telco. And what was interesting for me was that the case was really going back and forth at some points between is this a contract or a copyright issue? And initially, the copyright side was rejected. The court said this is a contract issue. And then on appeal, that was changed back into no, hang on, this is a copyright issue, which is exactly to your point. We don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
mm-hmm.
That's someone else, someone else's problem. Okay, this is good. Martin says that this section, talking about typical open source licenses, it's conveying the same information as before, OSI definition and so on. I think this is where we go back to, Jeff, what you're referring to, something that should be at the very beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I'm just going to make a note here.
Like this, like yeah, what? Probably not the first paragraph, but it's like maybe before we start talking about, well, I don't know. Maybe it's good to say, hey, there's these things called open source licenses, and they give you all these permissions, and you can get in trouble if you don't do the right thing. And oh, by the way, there is a steward of the definition, and it's the OSI, and blah blah blah. For more information, so maybe it is in the right place, but maybe there's some duplication of language.
Right. Yeah. We probably want to take this, put it in the beginning, and then not go back to it later. Um, this is an interesting one. This sentence, which isn't in the definition. So I'll just make a note that this is the stuff. Go at the start. The final sentence is more of an editorial. Whether software is open source or handled another way um, should be determined by agreement between the supplier and the recipient. And then Martin is saying this could be interpreted to mean the software supplier and the final end user.
I would probably strike that because I don't know if I don't know if I agree with that sentence at all. Um,
Mhm.
because it may be the, the original license creator has their opinion about it and is not the supplier and the recipient. You know,
You can still end up with a court case because of that.
Richard Stallman is going to have a much more important opinion about the GPL than a supplier and the recipient do.
Right.
I do think
Um,
it's part that in addition, some software that's licensed under a non-approved license may be treated as open source as well. Um, this has been a stick. This has been a personal sticking point for like 20 years for me, which is we have the OSI approved licenses, we have commercial stuff, and then we got this mushy middle. It's just getting even mushier these days with the um, restricted use licenses and all that. We don't have a great word for that. Like the non-approved licenses that are quasi open. We don't want to even call them open. Like I don't think they're treated as open source. There's maybe there's capital O open source and then lowercase o open source, but there's I think it's an important point, which is there's going to be OSI approved licenses, there's going to be commercial licenses, and there's going to be stuff that doesn't fall into either um, bucket that need to be managed as well.
right. Yeah. This is where in the standard itself we said, open source is defined as something under the OSI definition or the free software definition or similar license,
Mm-hmm.
which is where we threw it out to the room and was like, okay, that's someone else's problem. Maybe we should stick with that and not try to go into the determination of how you decide. We just refer to this definition, that definition, or similar, and let it there. And then
And,
other people can.
and I guess that in addition, some software is licensed under non may be treated as open source as well. Like I don't know if I would agree with that statement either. Um,
Right.
but I'll make a comment so we can maybe discuss it.
Please do. Please do. And we had an interesting case where in one of the editorial sections, as we were looking at the security definition, the or similar license was struck out. And we quickly got comments in. For instance, the certifier in China, who's affiliated with the government CAICT, submitted an issue saying, why are you striking that out?
Yeah.
And their point, I think, was that not all licenses that are open source, according to, let's say, even the OSI definition, are are in the list. If you
Mm-hmm.
go to OSI and you check, it's not necessarily there. And I guess their point was that we'd have to be very cautious about accidentally policing licenses which could be caught in a crossfire. Or, I suppose, alternatively, this is supposition on my part, if a non-American entity happened to make an open source definition of sorts somewhere, of excluding them from an ISO standard, even
Yep.
if what they did was perfectly in tune. You know,
Maybe the point of this paragraph is, that it is that, there's open source, there's commercial, and there's other licensed software that need to be managed. And
Right.
open source, but they need to be managed as part of this supply chain process.
Right. And in practice, I mean, we've always said the long-term goal is that essentially open source just becomes part of software asset management. You don't really notice it because it's in your blood. And I guess what we should aim for is something like what happened with Fujitsu, where all software is now managed by one department. So it's just software with terms, and they have the processes to manage it. If it's open source or proprietary or something in the middle, they've got the processes in play, which I think might be the end goal here.
I agree. I think we have an artificial split.
Yeah. And maybe it's because in the beginning open source seemed weird, but now with all of the bridging gray area stuff, we're going to end up with a almost perfect spectrum. Yeah, especially this isn't a comment intended to be an implicit criticism of Facebook, but a note that, for instance, Llama 2's license acts very much like open source until you hit 700 million users, and then it's a commercial license.
Yep.
And I think that kind of license is new, and that's that spectrum thing going on.
Mhm.
You know, that's not a comment for that type of licensing, but a note that it is happening. Okay, Martin has a point that's stuff about benefits of open source, what open source licenses define. Uh, it doesn't cover make available obligations. It talks about disclaimer of liability, and some obligations must be fulfilled on distribution. And I think Martin's touching on, for instance, SaaS areas. So that's the AGPL and so on.
Yep.
Mm. I think this can be addressed actually in a roundabout way, where we just take the same sentence and mess with this a bit. For instance, this section, oh, sorry, this so obligations must be fulfilled when the software is distributed. Oh, it's not copy pasting there. So nope. Okay. So some obligations must be fulfilled when the software is distributed by an individual or legal entity. Maybe we can just make that sentence simpler and multifunctional. The first one, the open source developer disclaims liability. The second one, the uh, the software comes with obligations that must be fulfilled.
And then maybe do like an EG. Some licenses
Yeah,
have that come under when software is distributed.
yeah, I like that. E.g., yeah, or maybe we can say, e.g., obligations that are activated when open source is distributed. And in this way, we're not excluding other things, and we're not defining or setting a mental model of what distribution is per se. Yeah. So obligations. Okay. Let's see if there's another one. Okay, this is an interesting one. Down here, Martin is just making a note that there's a comment that even though an OEM or ODM made a product, the brand owner of the product distributes the open source incorporated in it, and they're required to comply with the license. I think this comes because the leaflet was largely written by people who are representing brand owner companies and their mental model to the table. Martin says he doesn't think that this is easily understandable. He doesn't think it's necessarily true. Depends on defining brand owner. So we're looking at a disconnect here from people who are working inside brand owner companies on that distribution, how they refer to themselves, and then someone else reading this and thinking, what's meant by a brand owner? And maybe we can just change brand owner into distributor, you know, uh, or and then what else could we use rather than distributor to describe the company's name on the product? Oh, maybe we can change it into the and the company's responsible for distribution
Mhm.
of the product to market. And this way would be covering the company with their brand stamped on the product. We'd also be covering the logistics companies, let's say Walmart, that just sold it to you. And that maybe could cover the scope of the things in a way that will be understandable for people who aren't in that market sector, aren't using lingo every day. What do you think?
I agree. I'm going to have to take one more pass through this, and I kind of wonder, like, as you said, I think because the history of this, it really has that kind of automotive flavor to it, which is important because that's the drive. I think, no pun intended, the driver of a lot of clients right now. Uh, I almost wonder if there's almost this like, SaaS view. Put my persona on. I'm a SaaS person. I'm a automotive style person, IoT person. Do I see myself in this part of the document, which kind of gets more into the specifics?
Right, right, right. That's a really good point.
Because I might
All
tune on.
right.
I don't know what the heck's an ODM, and I don't know if we define ODM anywhere in here. If that's
Yeah, I don't think it is.
that might
All
be
right.
anytime we have an acronym. We do that for SDK, but we don't do that for ODM, so we should do that.
Absolutely. Such a good point. All right, needs definition on those items. Good catch. All right, so Martin's just saying that a line like patents you cannot grant.
And
Oh, no. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, um, patents that you cannot grant. I think maybe that's a translation issue.
Yeah,
Maybe something, make it more affirmative, like, you know, some open source libraries require a additional patent grant or an additional patent license.
right. This is a very dry one. Uh, just considerations around patents. I'm just putting that there as an example of something that sets the context but doesn't say something conclusive. So because then in the actual paragraph it's saying, if you've got a you can't grant, don't distribute open source covered by licenses that grant it, something like that. So maybe we can just say that this is the section about patents
And I
or
think the paragraph um, needs a rework. It's too dry and could be a little more tell a story.
right,
Like, if I'm a salesperson reading this, I'm like, I don't know what does it mean to grant a user license for patents. Like, tell me
right,
the story. Like, while you might get the open source for free, the use of that component may require a paid commercial patent, which is a which is a further negotiation or something like that.
really good point. Yep. Probably yeah, I love that idea. A salesperson reading this might have no idea what to do. So what do we do to give them the story they need? All right, let's see if there's another one. Okay, this is interesting. This is almost normative, and I'm very curious about this. When a company is litigated, so when there's a lawsuit, one of the largest damages is to its reputation. And Martin says potentially regardless of the legal outcome. And I think that's also a little cultural. I mean, one of the largest damages to a Japanese company or a German company is reputational. But I think there's some geographies where people really don't care much. They're not reputation, they're selling on price point only or similar. What do you think? Um,
I agree. Like
oh, sorry.
somebody, I could see somebody reading this and say, "Wait, there's no danger. Our only danger is our reputation. Well, we change our name every year. It doesn't matter. Um,
Right.
how many companies are out there called XYZ123? Um, you know, maybe an additional damage, not as opposed to one of the largest damages. An additional damage to the company is to its reputation.
I like that.
People can make their own judgment if that is the largest or least large.
Yeah, this is something that no joke. I was scrolling through Amazon yesterday to buy something, and so many products were just from not even no name but weird name brands, and you just know they're rotating those all the time.
Amazon is full of kind of like line noise brand names because they
Right.
come and go.
So yeah, I love the idea. When you're involved in litigation, one of the additional areas of damage is to reputation. It's to reputation. And that's it. We don't make a judgment that this is your big attack vector. We just say this is on the table. You know. All right. Love it. We're nearly out of time. So Martin makes a note on a figure. That's something we'll deal with later. Oh, we're done. Okay. So we did it. Oh, one last thing. Information that must be distributed open source, that section. For each open source component, any modifications must be distributed.
I,
Yeah, yeah.
um, maybe not for each open source component, but for um, mm,
Yeah, because that's basically going back to GPL or similar licenses.
mhm,
So,
yep,
I think the problem might be
must,
this.
must instead of may.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
shells and mays and cans.
Yeah. How about is often required by open source licenses?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or distribution. Yeah.
And this may be yet another place to mention SBOMs. There's compliance, and then there's other places where this information will show up. Even your license might not require that the open source is disclosed, but your use of SBOM and cybersecurity order XYZ requires it.
Right. I'm spilling both here information that may be required by open source licenses. Yeah, reference to SBOM. Yep, perfect. We didn't have really SBOM language in the general mindset when this was first being written. So I think it's really good to revisit with that optic. We had like SPDX, but the market as a whole wasn't really yet at the S-bomb cycle. All right, we're on the hour. We've closed off every comment apart from the comments about the image. Jeff, thank you so much. Had some audience members dial in and dial out over time, and this recording will go online shortly. Uh, Goodness me, we covered a lot of ground there, Jeff. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
as always. And I will do another. I've not had a chance to dive into this one recently, so I'm gonna do another pass through this guy.
Perfect. Have a beautiful evening, and I will talk with you soon.
Talk to you soon. Thanks for everything. Bye.